RTS games are one of the most classic and iconic genres for the PC platform, from Age of Empires to Starcraft, and even to the humble beginnings of the MOBA genre itself. Real-time strategy, as you can imagine, branches off from strategy games, which were typically turn-based, into a format that has you making decisions on the fly. The term RTS was coined by Brett Sperry when marketing Dune 2. The history therein we'll cover soon. Typically, games of this genre focus on positioning and maneuvering units or structures under their control to secure key areas on the map or simply to destroy opponents. Most start you with a limited number of units or structures while allowing the player to make more, assuming the resources are available. Accumulate more resources, commonly food, wood, and gold, by controlling parts of the map or designated nodes. Most win conditions require the additional building of structures and units along with key upgrades. This oftentimes requires the player to collect additional resources. In fact, resource management is an underplayed but incredibly vital strategy. In a similar vein, matches break down into two parts: combat and the lead up to combat. The player's perspective is usually that one of isometric or bird's eye with an interface display showing the minimap with a free roaming camera. Scroll around the map and issue commands with the keyboard and mouse. The action is fast-paced while remaining tactical, not unlike traditional action games. Micromanagement is a key aspect that ties all the different aspects of the RTS game together. This requires precise commands very quickly in a short amount of time. This is so important for high-level play, it's even a statistic aptly named actions per minute, or APM. Micromanagement is the inverse. As you can probably guess, macro play refers to overall strategy instead of minute-by-minute tactics. Despite the importance of macro management, the RTS genre has been criticized for being a clickfest and just a cheap imitation of traditional strategy games. Although it's hard not to sympathize, since a common strategy is simply to rush the opponent down before they have a chance to really take off. Fun fact, rushing was renamed to zerging because it was popularized by the StarCraft's Zerg race. So that's enough about what an RTS is. Here are the games that made it what it is today. Let's start with Cytron Masters. It's the earliest example of an RTS game. It was released August 1982 by Danny Berry for the Apple II. In-game, take control of a commander and collect resources produced by generators. Expand the energy to make more units like robot warriors. The game plays a lot like chess, even being played on a grid of a similar style. Defend and attack with a few different units unique with their own abilities like mines, bunkers, and missiles. As a prerequisite of the genre, build up an army bit by bit to eventually destroy the enemy. Legionnaire was a similar game of a similar time. Players took the role of a Kaiser and of course played in real time. Command the three types of units: infantry, cavalry, and guards, by hovering over the character and issuing commands. Keep in mind that this was on the Atari, so that's not an easy request. Despite its incredibly early conception, Legionnaire was surprisingly dense and expansive. Features like contour lines that affected movement and combat made their way into the game. In addition to random starting points for each player, one would only see a small portion of the map at once, requiring scrolling across the screen to see more. Despite having many features, a competent AI was not one of them. The player could simply build a few units, take the high ground, and wait for the enemy to arrive to slaughter them. The developers knew this and made it so one could only get a high score by seeking out the barbarians. The Ancient Art of War is one of the most iconic games of this budding genre at the time. Released for Apple II and Macintosh among others in 1984, this game is based on the book written by Sun Tzu, and as one can imagine is a battle simulator. Like similar games, players control several types of units including knights, archers, barbarians, and spies. Each unit has an advantage and disadvantage against each other units, a faux rock, paper, scissors kind of setup. Spies, however, do not fight. Instead, they function like modern-day scouts, meaning they have better movement speed and vision. Players can pick from a bunch of campaigns, artificial intelligence, characters, and difficulties. However, the ancient art of war is entirely combat tactics based, as there is no resource gathering, which is a staple of the genre today. In addition to the several options of play, one can also create their own maps and missions built into the game itself. Herzog Zwei was released for the Sega Genesis by Technosoft in 1989. Zwei is widely considered to be the grandfather of both the RTS and MOBA genres. Through the use of mechs, players could purchase, transfer, and command units. Micromanagement is absolutely necessary as both players have finite fuel and ammunition. Longer fights require more micromanaging since few processes are automatic. A typical win condition is to take control of outposts around the battlefield which give the player resources. They also allow refueling and unit creation. Despite being mechanically dense and a precursor to multiple genres, Herzog was considered a commercial failure due to the lack of marketing and generally being at the wrong place at the wrong time. Now, Dune 2 hit stores in 1992, and the birth of the genre with it. While not the first real-time strategy game, it has certainly established the framework that would become the modern RTS. The general win strategy is to harvest spice using a harvester, then convert the spice into credits for making units with which to destroy the enemy with. In addition to real-time decay of buildings, many features from Dune 2 appeared in future games, like an emphasis on resource management, base and unit construction, tech trees, difference in factions, and context-sensitive commands. Converse to its spiritual successors, Dune 2 had major critical acclaim, earning a spot as one of the best and most influential games of all time. Warcraft, Orcs and Humans, released in 1992, was the game to become such a hit in its own right as to spawn an entire series and over time fund some of the biggest and best games ever released. Warcraft brought innovation both in mission design and gameplay elements, along with a strong emphasis on the multiplayer market. Unlike most games of a similar genre, Orcs and Humans focused on small groups of units and their story. And then we start getting into the modern era. Age of Empires debuted in 1997, and since then has released a few sequels and my personal favorite, Age of Mythology. Age of Empires is set in and around historical events including the dawn of man in the Stone Age to the Age of Kings in the Middle Ages. The final game in this series, aptly named Age of Empires 3, focused on the modern day, and it kind of flopped. The first, however, was a smashing success, pulling high scores and selling millions of copies. In addition to a true-to-form historical theme, Age of Empires focused intensely on better, more fair artificial intelligence. Instead of simply increasing stats like initial resources, enemies would play smarter on higher difficulties. Then finally we get to StarCraft. It's a spin-off series also developed by Blizzard, released in 1998. In terms of sheer numbers, StarCraft definitely takes the cake in both profits and players. The gist is that you can play one of three factions, the Terrans, the Zerg, and the Protoss. Each come with their own units, tech trees, buildings, and an eventual storyline. With Blizzard heading the mantle, of course it's going to be clean cut and cinematic. With such a huge fan base, high skill multiplayer play, and the breakneck pace at which the internet and its community had developed, it's no wonder esports started here. But that's a beast to tackle for another day. And then finally we get to basically today. And then StarCraft 2 came out and continued to foster the same fan base with similarly excellent results. But other than that, not a whole lot of major or new IPs for the RTS genre has came out since StarCraft's debut. They made such a good game, so expansive, it blew away any current and future competition. That's how big of a hit it and other Blizzard titles are. They are relentless and uncompromising. Around this time is also when MOBAs would branch off and become a genre all on their own, but that too is a subject for another time. Real-time strategy games have been around since the dawn of video gaming. They require high actions per minute and fast thinking. But one thing's for sure, people around the world will come together to engage in some sweet micro and macro management action.